15 years of marriage, a perfect anniversary dinner. And then her husband says he wants an open relationship. Shocking. Wait until you find out that was just the beginning. The affair had been going on for months. The mistress was pregnant, and his plan to keep both women was so disturbing you won't believe it. This is Susan's story, and what she did when she discovered the complete truth will make you stand up and applaud. Susan was 38 years old and believed she knew James better than anyone. 15 years of marriage creates an intimacy that seems unbreakable. They built a life together, a home, memories, plans for the future. She woke up every day next to him, made coffee just the way he liked it, listened to his complaints about work, laughed at the bad jokes he told. She thought she was happy. She thought he was too. But Susan was living in a giant illusion. And on the day that should have been a celebration of love and commitment, on the day of their 15-year wedding anniversary, she discovered that the man who vowed to love her was hiding secrets that would destroy everything she knew. Secrets so shocking they would make anyone question their own reality. What you're about to hear is not just a story about betrayal. It's a story about brutal psychological manipulation, about emotional abuse disguised as modern love, about how a person can use beautiful words to hide the cruelest and most selfish intentions. But it's also a story about unexpected strength, about rediscovering who you really are when everything crumbles around you, about finding courage in places you didn't even know existed inside you. Susan spent years erasing herself, adapting, molding herself to be the perfect wife. And when she finally saw the truth about the man who slept beside her every night, she had to make a choice. Accept the humiliation and live in the lie, or fight for herself, even if it meant losing everything she knew. What she chose will surprise you. And what happened next will leave you breathless. Before we continue, we want to know where you're watching us from. Leave your city and country here in the comments. We love knowing that our community is growing around the world. Susan woke up that morning with a smile on her face. 15 years. 15 years since she said yes to James in a small ceremony surrounded by friends and family. 15 years since she promised to love that man in all moments, good and bad. She looked to the side and saw James still sleeping. The first rays of morning sun came through the window and lit up his face. He looked peaceful, at ease. Susan felt that familiar feeling of love in her chest. She was lucky. She had a hard-working husband, a comfortable house in a quiet neighborhood, a stable life. It wasn't perfect, of course. What marriage is? But it was theirs. Susan got out of bed carefully so as not to wake him and went straight to the kitchen. She had a whole day of preparations ahead. Today would be special. She wanted everything to be perfect. She spent weeks planning every detail. James's favorite dinner, the wine he liked, the music that played at their wedding, the scented candles that created that romantic atmosphere. While making coffee, Susan thought about all the moments they lived together, the trips they took, the fights they had and overcame, the nights watching movies on the couch, the lazy Sundays in bed. They weren't extraordinary moments, but they were theirs. And that meant everything to her. James came down to the kitchen around 8. He gave her a quick kiss on the forehead and grabbed the coffee cup Susan had already prepared, exactly how he liked it, with 2 spoons of sugar and a little milk. "Happy anniversary, love," Susan said with a big smile. James gave a half smile and replied, "Yeah, 15 years. Went by fast." Something in his voice seemed strange to Susan, but she ignored it. He was probably tired. Work had been tough lately. At least that's what he always said. "I'm going to make a special dinner tonight," Susan announced excitedly. "Your favorite, and I bought that wine you love." James just nodded, looking at his phone. Susan felt a pang of frustration, but pushed the feeling away. Today was a day to celebrate, not to fight. The day passed in a cloud of preparations. Susan went to the market, bought the freshest ingredients, spent the afternoon in the kitchen preparing each dish with care. She set the dining room table with a beautiful tablecloth she saved for special occasions, placed the candles, arranged the flowers. Everything was perfect. At 6 in the evening, Susan went upstairs to get ready. She chose the blue dress James always said he loved on her. She put on makeup, fixed her hair, sprayed the perfume he gave her as a gift on their last anniversary. She even bought new lingerie for after dinner. After all, 15 years deserved a complete celebration. When James got home from work at 7, everything was ready. The house smelled like delicious food. The candles were lit. The music was playing softly in the background. Susan was radiant, waiting for him in the dining room. James stopped at the door and looked around. For a moment, Susan thought she saw something strange in his eyes, something she couldn't identify. But then he forced a smile and said, "You outdid yourself." They sat at the table and began to have dinner. Susan tried to make conversation, talking about good memories, about future plans, about how grateful she was that they had built a life together. James responded with monosyllables, distracted, looking more at his plate than at her. Susan felt a tightness in her chest. Something was wrong. She knew James well enough to know when he had something on his mind. "Is everything okay?" she asked, placing her hand over his on the table. James pulled his hand back and took a deep breath. He looked at her, and Susan saw something in his eyes that made her heart freeze. It wasn't anger. It wasn't sadness. It was determination. "We need to talk," James said. Susan felt the air get heavy. Those words never brought anything good. She forced a smile and said, "Sure, love. About what?" James pushed his plate aside, crossed his arms on the table, and looked directly into her eyes. What he said next made Susan's world stop spinning. "I want an open relationship." Susan blinked. Once. Twice. She was sure she heard wrong. She gave a nervous laugh and said, "What? Is this a joke?" "It's not a joke, Susan. I'm serious. I've been thinking a lot about this. Our marriage is stagnant. We need to evolve. We need to try new things." Susan felt like she had been punched in the stomach. She looked at her husband, searching for any sign that this was a joke in very bad taste. But he was completely serious. "James, today is our wedding anniversary," she said, her voice shaking. "I prepared all this. What are you saying?" "I'm saying we need to open our relationship. Other people, other experiences. This will be good for us." His words echoed in Susan's mind like a nightmare. She felt nauseous. She got up from her chair so fast she almost knocked over the wine glass. "Are you crazy?" she said, her voice coming out louder than she intended. "Are you completely crazy?" James remained calm, which somehow made everything even more scary. "Susan, I knew you would react like this. That's why I brought it up today. We need to talk about this like adults." "Like adults?" Susan repeated, in disbelief. "You just asked for an open relationship on our wedding anniversary, and you want me to react like an adult?" She felt tears starting to burn her eyes, but refused to let them fall. Not yet. Not in front of him. She turned her back and walked quickly to the bathroom, locking the door behind her. "Susan!" James knocked on the door. "Susan, open this door. We need to talk about this." But Susan couldn't speak. She slid down the door until she was sitting on the cold bathroom floor, hugging her knees against her chest. The tears finally came, silent and hot, running down her face and smudging the makeup she had put on so carefully. Outside, James kept knocking on the door, saying they needed to talk like adults, that she was overreacting, that this could be good for both of them if she just gave it a chance. Susan covered her ears with her hands, but couldn't block out his words. They entered her mind like knives, cutting every piece of the life she thought she had built. And it was there, sitting on the cold bathroom floor, on the day that should have been a celebration of love, that Susan realized she didn't know the man on the other side of that door. Not really. Now think about it. What if at the moment you most expected to be loved, the person you completely trust destroyed everything with just one sentence? What would you do? How would you react? Leave your answer in the comments. And if you're enjoying this story, don't forget to leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you don't miss any of our stories. Susan didn't know how much time had passed sitting on that cold bathroom floor. It could have been minutes or hours. Time completely lost meaning. The knocking on the door had stopped a while ago. The house was silent now. She finally got up, looked in the mirror, and almost didn't recognize the woman looking back. The makeup was smudged, her eyes red and swollen, the blue dress wrinkled. She looked destroyed. She felt destroyed. Susan left the bathroom. The house was dark, only the kitchen lights still on. James wasn't in the living room anymore. She heard the door to the master bedroom close. He had gone to sleep, as if nothing had happened. Susan went to the guest bedroom. She couldn't sleep in bed with him. Not that night. Probably never again. She lay down on the small bed, still dressed, and stared at the ceiling. Sleep didn't come. How could it? Her mind wouldn't stop. She replayed the last few months looking for signs she should have seen. James coming home late. James constantly on his phone. James less interested in her. James saying he was too tired to talk. The signs were all there. She simply chose not to see them. When the sun started to rise, Susan was still awake. Her eyes burned from exhaustion, but her brain wouldn't shut off. She heard James wake up and move around in the next room, heard him go into the bathroom, heard the shower turn on. And it was at that moment that Susan had a thought she never imagined having. She needed to know the truth, the whole truth. She got up and went to the master bedroom. James's phone was on the nightstand. He always left it there when he went to take a shower. Susan looked at that device. She had never touched his phone, never. In 15 years of marriage, she had always respected his privacy, but that time was over. With trembling hands, she picked up the phone. She tried to unlock it. The password was their wedding anniversary date, 15/05. The irony hurt. She opened the messages. There was a conversation at the top of the list. The contact name was just A. The first message she saw made her stop breathing. I talked to her last night. It was as hard as I imagined. She didn't react well. The response came seconds later. Did you tell her about me? Not yet, but I'll have to tell her soon. I can't keep hiding you. Susan felt her legs weaken. She sat on the bed and kept scrolling. The messages went back months, 8 months of conversations. At first they were professional messages. Then they became friendly, then romantic, then intimate. When can we stop hiding? I want everyone to know about us. Soon, love, I just need to prepare the ground first. Love. He called another woman love. Susan kept reading, each message like a stab. She saw plans for secret meetings. She saw James lying about where he was. She saw him saying things to this woman that he never said to Susan anymore. And then she saw the full name in a message. Amber. He called her Amber. Susan opened the phone's browser. The search history was there, clear as day. How to file for divorce. Division of assets in divorce. Say. How much does a divorce cost? Husband's rights in divorce. The searches were from 2 weeks ago, even before he asked for the open relationship. He was planning the divorce before talking to her. Susan went back to the messages, and then she saw something that made her world completely collapse. A message from 3 weeks ago from this Amber. I had the ultrasound today. Everything's fine with the baby. I'm already 5 months along. James's response. I'm so happy. I can't wait to meet our son. 5 months. The mistress was 5 months pregnant with his child. Susan heard the shower turn off. Panic. James was getting out of the shower. She quickly grabbed her own phone and took pictures of the main messages. Evidence. She needed evidence. She put his phone back exactly where it was and ran back to the guest bedroom, closing the door quietly. A few minutes later, she heard James getting dressed, going downstairs. The front door opened and closed. The car started and left. Susan waited a few minutes to make sure he was gone. Then she left the guest bedroom and went to the living room window. She saw his car disappearing around the corner. Only then did she realize she had been holding her breath. She sat on the couch and looked at the photos on her phone. The proof was all there. The betrayal, the mistress, the pregnancy, the divorce plans. She saved everything to the cloud, sent copies to her email. She needed to make sure she wouldn't lose this evidence. She was about to make coffee when, 15 minutes after his normal leaving time, Susan heard the key turning in the door. James was coming back. She heard his footsteps quickly going up the stairs, heading straight to the master bedroom. "Damn it!" she heard him mutter. Susan went upstairs and stood at the bedroom door. James was frantically searching for something. "What are you looking for?" she asked, her voice cold. James turned around, surprised. "My phone, I forgot it. Did you see it?" Susan walked into the room, went to the nightstand and picked up the phone that was there. She held it in her hand, looking at him. "This phone?" she asked, her voice eerily calm. James reached out his hand. "Yes, give it to me. I'm late." "I saw everything, James," Susan said, not handing over the phone. James froze. His face went pale. "What are you talking about?" "I saw the messages with Amber. I saw about the pregnancy. I saw the searches about divorce," Susan continued, each word coming out slowly, clearly. You went through my phone?" James asked, but it wasn't a question. It was an accusation. "I saw," she said, her voice eerily calm. "I saw everything." James froze in the bedroom doorway. His face went pale. "Susan, I can explain." "Explain then," Susan said, turning the screen toward him. "Explain the messages with Amber. Explain the 5-month pregnancy. Explain why you were searching about divorce." Susan couldn't believe what she was hearing. "You've been cheating on me for months. You're going to have a child with another woman, and you're worried about privacy." "You had no right to go through my things," James insisted, taking the phone from her hand. "That's invasion of privacy. You violated my trust." "I violated your trust," Susan repeated, her voice rising. "Are you kidding me?" "You're making a big deal out of nothing," James said, putting the phone in his pocket. "I was going to tell you about everything, in my time, my way, but you had to ruin everything by snooping where you shouldn't." "A big deal out of nothing." Susan felt tears burning her eyes. "You call finding out my husband is having a child with another woman making a big deal out of nothing?" "You're overreacting, like always," James said, his voice irritated. "I offered you a solution, an open relationship, civilized, mature, but you want to turn everything into a tragedy. You've always been too dramatic." Susan looked at that man, the man she married 15 years ago, and realized she didn't know him. Maybe she never had. "Get out of here," she said, her voice low but firm. "This is my house too," James shot back. "Get out of here," Susan repeated. James looked at her for a long moment. Then he shook his head, grabbed the phone he had come to get, and left. Susan stood in the middle of the room, listening to his footsteps going down the stairs, the door slamming, the car leaving, and then, finally, she broke down. She fell to the floor and cried. She cried for everything she had lost, for everything that had been a lie, for 15 years of her life that would never come back. But in the middle of the tears, in the middle of the pain, there was something new growing inside her. Anger. Not the hot, explosive anger, but the cold, determined anger. James had just shown exactly who he was. A man who, even caught red-handed cheating, could turn the situation around and make Susan look like the villain. But Susan wasn't going to be the villain in his story anymore. She was going to fight, and she was going to win. Susan grabbed her phone with trembling hands and called Karen. Karen answered on the second ring. "Susan, are you okay?" "No," Susan said, her voice breaking. I'm not okay at all. I need to see you. Now." "Where are you?" Karen asked, concern clear in her voice. "At home, but I need to get out of here. I need to breathe," Susan said, feeling panic rising in her throat. 20 minutes. Our usual coffee shop. I'm already leaving," Karen said without hesitation. Susan quickly washed her face, grabbed her purse and keys, and left the house. She needed to get out of there before she completely lost her mind. The coffee shop was a small, cozy place a few blocks from her house. When Susan arrived, Karen was already there, waiting at a table in the corner. Karen immediately stood up and hugged her friend. It was only when she felt that hug that Susan realized how much she needed someone on her side. They sat down, and Karen ordered 2 coffees. Then she waited patiently for Susan to start talking. And Susan told everything. The anniversary dinner, the request for an open relationship, the sleepless night, how she went through James's phone in the morning, the messages with Amber, the 5-month pregnancy, the searches about divorce, and the confrontation, where he had the audacity to accuse her of invading his privacy. Karen listened to everything in silence, her expression becoming more and more serious. When Susan finished, Karen held her friend's hands across the table. "Susan, I need to tell you something," Karen said, looking guilty. "I always thought he was strange." Susan blinked. "What?" "At the last few gatherings we had with you guys, in recent months, he was different, distant, always on his phone, always in a hurry to leave. I wanted to tell you, but I thought I was imagining things," Karen admitted. Susan felt a pang. Everyone saw it, except her. "And there's more," Karen continued, biting her lip. "Mark mentioned something about 3 weeks ago. He was talking to a friend, and they mentioned James. They said he had talked about problems in your marriage, that you guys were going through a rough patch." Susan felt her blood boil. Rough patch. He was preparing the ground, telling everyone our marriage was bad, so when the truth came out, he could say it wasn't a surprise to anyone. "Exactly," Karen agreed. "He planned everything, Susan, every detail, every lie." Susan leaned back in her chair, processing everything. 15 years, Karen, 15 years of my life. "You didn't lose anything," Karen said firmly. "You got rid of a liar, a manipulator, someone who never deserved you." They stayed there for hours, talking, planning, trying to understand. Karen didn't leave Susan alone for a minute, but eventually, Susan knew she needed to go back home. She couldn't run away forever. When Susan got home in the late afternoon, James was there, sitting on the living room couch, watching TV, eating popcorn, as if it were just another normal day, as if nothing had happened. When she walked in, he looked at her casually. "Where were you?" he asked. "Out," Susan replied, her voice cold. James shrugged and turned his attention back to the TV. "Are you still making a big deal?" Susan stood there, looking at him. "A big deal? You call this a big deal?" "You're overreacting, Susan, like always," James said, not even looking at her. "I offered you a solution, an open relationship. Many modern couples do this. It works perfectly." "I don't want an open relationship," Susan said, trying to keep her voice steady. "You didn't even try," James shot back, finally looking at her. "You don't even know Amber. If you met her, you'd see this can work. She's amazing. I even think you two could be friends." Susan felt like she'd been slapped. He wanted her to meet his mistress. He wanted them to be friends. "Are you serious?" Susan asked, incredulous. "Completely," James said. "Look, I know it seems strange at first, but if you would just try, if you would just give it a chance and meet her, talk to her, you'd see it's not as bad as it seems. Actually, it might even be good for you too." "Good for me?" Susan repeated. "Yes," James said, as if it were obvious. "You can also meet other people, have other experiences. This can bring new life to our marriage. It can make us happier, both of us." Susan looked at that man and realized something terrible. He really believed this. He really thought he was being reasonable, that he was offering a solution that was good for everyone. "I'm not going to meet Amber," Susan said, her voice coming out firmer than she expected. "I'm not going to accept an open relationship, and I'm not going to pretend this is normal." James sighed, frustrated. "You're being closed-minded, Susan. You're being old-fashioned. The world has changed. Relationships have changed. You need to evolve." "Evolve?" Susan felt anger rising. "You call cheating evolving?" "It's not cheating if I'm being honest about it," James argued. "I told you. I asked your permission. That's being an adult. That's being mature." Susan couldn't listen to this anymore. "I'm going to sleep in the guest bedroom." Again. James rolled his eyes. How long are you going to keep up this act? Susan didn't answer. She went upstairs, entered the guest bedroom, and locked the door. She lay on the bed and looked at the ceiling. These were the first times in 15 years that she slept in a separate room from her husband. The first time she really felt the marriage was over. But at the same time, for the first time in days, she felt something beyond pain and confusion. She felt determination. James thought she was just going to accept it, that she would bow down, like she always did, that she would meet the mistress and smile and pretend everything was okay. But he was wrong. Susan didn't know exactly what she was going to do yet, but she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't going to let James destroy what was left of her. She wasn't going to accept crumbs. She wasn't going to live a lie. She was going to fight for herself. And James was about to discover that he didn't know Susan as well as he thought. The next morning, Susan woke up with a purpose. She wasn't going to be passive anymore. She wasn't going to wait for James to do the right thing. She needed information. She needed to understand exactly what was happening. While James was at work, Susan went to his home office. She had never gone through his things before. She had always respected his privacy, his independence. But that time was over. She opened the desk drawers, documents, bills, bank statements. Susan began to examine everything carefully. And that's when she saw something that made her stomach turn. Statements from a bank account she didn't know about. An account only in James's name. And there were transfers. Many transfers. Thousands of dollars being moved from their joint account to this secret account over the last 6 months. Susan sat in the chair, her hands trembling as she looked at the papers. He was diverting money. Money that belonged to both of them. Money they had saved together. She kept searching and found more. Payment receipts. Rent for an apartment downtown. James was paying $1,500 a month for an apartment she didn't even know existed. Susan took pictures of everything with her phone. More evidence, more proof of his betrayal. The following days were unbearable. The tension at home was so heavy that Susan could barely breathe. James oscillated between two extremes, and Susan never knew which version of him she would encounter. Sometimes he was manipulative. He brought flowers, made coffee, said he loved her, that they could get through this together, that she just needed to have an open mind. "I love you, Susan," he said one morning, holding her hands. "All I want is our happiness, mine and yours. Please, give me a chance to show you this can work." But other times, when Susan didn't respond the way he wanted, when she questioned something, the mask fell off completely. "You're so boring," he said in an argument. "So dull. It's no surprise I looked for someone else. You suffocate me, Susan. You're tedious." His words were like poison, each cruel comment eroding a little more of her self-esteem. Susan knew she couldn't continue like this. She needed help, professional help. She searched for divorce lawyers in the area and found Patricia Miller, expert in complicated cases, excellent reviews. Susan scheduled an appointment for the following week. That night, during dinner, James was in his manipulative version, smiling, attentive. "I was thinking," he said, pouring wine for both of them, "about us, about our future." Susan said nothing, just waited. "I fell in love with Amber," James admitted, looking directly at Susan. "I didn't plan this. It happened naturally. And I know this hurts you. But Susan, love has no limits. The heart doesn't follow rules." Susan felt nauseous. He was romanticizing the betrayal. "I want to stay with you," James continued, "and I want to be with her too. Why do I have to choose? Why does love have to be so restrictive? We're adults. We can create our own rules." "They're not rules," Susan said, her voice low. "It's respect. It's commitment. It's everything you promised when you married me." "Promises made 15 years ago," James said. "People change, Susan. I changed. You can't hold me to old promises." "So you want a divorce?" Susan asked directly. James looked surprised by the question. "No, I don't want a divorce. I want our marriage to evolve. I want you to accept this. I want you to meet Amber. I want us all to be happy together." Susan shook her head. "That's never going to happen." James sighed, frustrated. "You're being impossible. Look, I have an idea. Let's do couples therapy." Susan looked at him, surprised. "Yes," James continued, excited. "A therapist can help us, can help you understand, can show you that what I'm proposing isn't crazy. There are therapists specialized in non-traditional relationships. She can mediate all of this, help you accept it." Susan wanted to laugh. He wanted to take her to therapy to convince her to accept his betrayal. But then she had an idea. Maybe therapy would be useful, not to accept the open relationship, but to buy time, to have a professional see James's manipulative behavior, to plan her exit carefully. "Okay," Susan said. James looked genuinely surprised. "Really? You'll go?" "I will," Susan confirmed, "but I choose the therapist, not you." James hesitated, but then agreed. "Okay, you choose. Just choose someone open-minded, please." Susan nodded, but she already knew exactly who to look for. She didn't want someone open-minded about non-traditional relationships. She wanted someone who would see through James's manipulations, someone who would help her find the strength to leave. That night, Susan searched for therapists. She found Diane Thompson, 20 years of experience, specialized in relationship dynamics and emotional trauma. Exactly what Susan needed. She scheduled the first session for 3 days later. Meanwhile, Susan had her consultation with Patricia, the lawyer. The office was elegant and professional. Patricia was a 45-year-old woman, serious, competent. "Tell me everything," Patricia said, opening a notepad. And Susan told her. She showed the photos of the messages, the bank statements, the receipts for the apartment. She told her about the request for an open relationship, about Amber's pregnancy, about everything. Patricia listened attentively, taking notes. "Susan, you have a very strong case," Patricia said when she finished. "The diverted money, the secret apartment, the evidence of betrayal. All of this works in your favor in a divorce proceeding." "So I have options?" Susan asked. "You have many options," Patricia confirmed, "and significant rights. The house, the assets, everything can be divided favorably for you given the circumstances." Susan felt an immense weight lift from her shoulders. She had options. She had rights. She wasn't trapped. "For now," Patricia instructed, "keep documenting everything. All conversations, all messages. Everything he does or says, keep a record. All of this can be useful." Susan left Patricia's office feeling something she hadn't felt in days. Hope. Not hope of saving the marriage, but hope of saving herself. When she got home, James was there. He looked at her, trying to read her expression. "Where were you?" he asked. "Taking care of some things," Susan replied vaguely. "Did you schedule the therapy?" James asked, anxious. "I did. Friday at 2 in the afternoon," Susan said. James smiled. "Great. You'll see, Susan. The therapist will help you understand, will show you this can work, that we can all be happy." Susan said nothing, but inside she knew the truth. The therapy was going to happen, but not for the reasons James imagined. Susan wasn't going there to accept the open relationship. She was going there to find the strength to end the marriage once and for all. The therapist's waiting room was quiet. Walls in soft tones, plants in the corners, relaxing music. Susan sat in an armchair, her hands sweating. James was beside her, scrolling through his phone. The office door opened and a woman about 50 years old appeared. Gray hair pulled back in a bun, thin-framed glasses, gentle smile. "Susan and James, I'm Diane. Please, come in." The office was welcoming. Comfortable sofas, soft lighting, a bookshelf full of books. "Who would like to start by telling me why you're here?" Diane asked. James jumped in. "We're going through a transition in our relationship. I proposed opening our marriage, evolving as a couple, but Susan is having difficulty accepting it." "Susan, how would you describe the situation?" Diane asked. "James asked me for an open relationship on our 15-year anniversary. Without warning. When I didn't accept, He accused me of being closed-minded and old-fashioned. I didn't accuse, James interrupted. I just said she could be more progressive. James, let Susan finish, Diane said gently. Then I discovered he had already been involved with another woman for months, Susan continued, and that she's 5 months pregnant, with his child. The silence was heavy. Diane looked at James. Is this true? James shifted uncomfortably. Yes, but context matters. Amber and I developed a genuine connection. It wasn't planned. It happened naturally. When I realized my feelings, I wanted to be honest with Susan. That's why I proposed the open relationship. Transparent after months of lies, Susan murmured. Susan is right, Diane said. Transparency means being honest from the beginning. What you're describing is betrayal followed by an attempt at legitimization. James frowned. Oh, I don't see it that way. I see it as evolution. Many couples practice ethical non-monogamy. It's valid and modern. It's valid when both parties agree before any external involvement, Diane explained. Not when it's imposed after. I'm not imposing, James argued. I'm proposing. Trying to find a solution where everyone is happy. Susan, how did you feel when James made this proposal? Diane asked. Destroyed, Susan replied, her voice breaking. Betrayed, deceived. I spent 15 years being faithful, dedicating myself, and I discovered that none of it meant anything. That's not true, James protested. Our marriage means a lot. That's why I'm trying to save it. Instead of divorce, I'm offering an alternative. An alternative where you have everything without consequences, Susan said. You want to keep the house, the life we built, but you also want Amber and the baby. You want me to accept it and be grateful. When you put it like that, it sounds selfish, James said, frustrated. That's because it is selfish, Diane said firmly. James, did you consider what Susan wants? Did you ask what would make her happy? Silence. I assumed she would benefit too, James admitted. But did you ask? Diane insisted. No. And did you ask if she was happy in the marriage before seeking another relationship? James didn't respond. Healthy open relationships are built on communication, trust, and consent from all parties, Diane explained. What you're describing is betrayal that you're trying to justify retroactively. Susan felt relief. Someone was finally saying the truth out loud. James was visibly irritated. I thought you were going to help us find a solution, not judge my choices and take her side. I'm not judging, Diane said calmly. I'm pointing out the dynamic. If you want an open relationship, that's valid, but it can't be imposed. And it doesn't justify betrayal that already happened. James stood up abruptly. This is ridiculous. You've already taken sides. This was a waste of time. He grabbed his keys. Susan, are you coming or not? Susan looked at him, then at Diane. I'm staying. James looked at her in disbelief. You're kidding. I'm not. I'm going to finish the session. You can go. James waited for her to change her mind. When she didn't, he shook his head. Unbelievable, he muttered, and left slamming the door. Susan felt tears starting to come. Are you okay? Diane asked gently. Yes. Actually, better than I've been in days. It was very brave to stay. I don't feel brave. I feel scared, lost. That's normal. Susan, if you'd like, we can continue with individual sessions. I can help you process all of this. I would like that very much. They spent the rest of the session talking. Diane asked gentle but incisive questions. Susan told things she had never told anyone. The small cruelties of James. The comments that made her doubt herself. The times he made her feel dramatic. This has a name, Diane said. Gaslighting. It's psychological manipulation where the person makes you question your own reality. Psychological manipulation. Susan had never thought of it that way. James never raised his hand. But the words, the actions, the constant manipulation, that was abuse too. Why didn't I see it before? Susan asked. Because you loved him, Diane responded. When we love, we give the benefit of the doubt. We believe the best in them. We excuse behaviors. It's not weakness, it's humanity. But now you're seeing it, and that's the first step. Susan felt more tears, but different ones. Not just of pain, of liberation, of validation. For the first time in weeks, Susan didn't feel crazy. She didn't feel dramatic. She didn't feel wrong. She felt seen, and that made all the difference. The following weeks were an emotional roller coaster. Susan started seeing Diane every week. Each session was like peeling back layers, revealing painful truths she had buried for years. She realized it hadn't been just the last few months. James had always been manipulative, always been narcissistic. Susan had just gotten so used to it that she stopped seeing it as abnormal. You adapted, Diane explained in one session. It's a survival response. You molded your personality to avoid conflict, to keep the peace. But in the process, you lost pieces of yourself. Susan knew it was true. She used to paint, go out with friends, have her own hobbies. But little by little, everything disappeared. James never explicitly forbade it. He just made comments. You're going out again? You spend more time with your friends than with me. Painting doesn't pay the bills. Small comments that, over 15 years, made her give up everything she loved. Between therapy sessions, Susan had another consultation with Patricia, the lawyer. You have a very strong case, Patricia said. The diverted money, the secret apartment, the evidence of betrayal. Everything works in your favor. And the house? Susan asked. With the evidence you have, you'll likely get the house, Patricia explained. But keep documenting everything, every message, every interaction. Keep a diary of events. At home, things were becoming unbearable. James tried to be charming some days, bringing flowers, making dinners, saying he loved her. But other days, he was cruel. You know, James said one night during dinner, you could also meet other people. If it makes you feel better, you can have a relationship too. That way we're even. Susan looked at him, incredulous. Even? You think this is about being even? Isn't it? James asked. You're angry because you think I have something you don't have. So have it too. Find someone. I don't care. I don't want to find anyone, James, Susan said, trembling with anger. I want a real marriage, or I want out of it. You're being impossible, James muttered. It was exhausting, toxic, and it was destroying what was left of Susan's mental health. You need to consider leaving there, Diane said in one session. The environment is harming you. But it's my house, Susan protested. You shouldn't have to leave, Diane agreed. But sometimes, for safety and well-being, the best choice isn't the fairest one. Susan knew Diane was right, but the idea of leaving her house, of giving James that victory, was unbearable. And then, on a Thursday night, everything changed. James had come home late, very late. It was past midnight. Susan was in the guest bedroom when she heard the door slam. She heard James come up the stairs, go to the master bedroom, and then come back. His heavy footsteps in the hallway, the door burst open. James was there, clearly drunk, eyes red. We need to talk, he said, his voice slurred. James, you're drunk. Let's talk in the morning, Susan said, trying to stay calm. No, James shouted. We're talking now. You're destroying our marriage. You're being stubborn and selfish. James, please, leave the room. I'm not leaving. This is my house. You don't tell me what to do. Susan stood up, keeping her distance. You're drunk. Go to sleep. You think you're better than me? James kept shouting. You, who don't have the courage to live, to experience things. You're pathetic, Susan. Pathetic. Leave the room now, James. Or what? He challenged, taking a step toward her. Susan grabbed her phone. Or I'm calling the police. James gave a bitter laugh. You wouldn't have the guts. But something in Susan's expression must have convinced him, because he suddenly grabbed a plate that was on the dresser and threw it against the wall. The plate shattered into 1,000 pieces, some shards flying dangerously close to Susan. One cut her arm slightly. See what you make me do, James shouted. You drive me crazy. And then he left, slamming the door. Susan stood there, trembling, looking at the shards on the floor. Her arm was bleeding slightly, nothing serious, but it was bleeding. And it was at that moment that Susan knew. She couldn't stay in that house anymore. It wasn't safe anymore. With trembling hands, she grabbed her phone and called Karen. "Susan, it's 2 a.m. What happened?" Karen answered, worried. "I need to get out of here. Now, can I come to your house?" "Of course. I'm coming to get you. 20 minutes. Are you safe?" "I am." "He's in his room." "Lock your door. Don't open it for anyone but me. I'm leaving now." Susan locked the door and started packing. Clothes, documents, important belongings. She worked fast, heart racing. 15 minutes later, her phone rang. Karen had arrived. Susan went down the stairs quietly, carrying her suitcase. She opened the door and left. She didn't look back. Karen was in the car. She got out and helped Susan with the suitcase. "Are you okay?" Karen asked, hugging her friend. "I am now," Susan replied. And for the first time in weeks, she was telling the truth. When Susan was already at Karen's house, safe and calm, she grabbed her phone. James had sent 3 messages. The first aggressive, "You're weak, you're a coward. You ran away in the middle of the night like a child." The second manipulative, "Susan, please, come back. I drank too much. I didn't mean to scare you. I love you." Susan didn't respond to any of them, but she needed to make her position clear. She typed a firm message. "James, I'm not coming back. I don't accept an open relationship. I don't accept your apologies. We need space. Don't contact me anymore. My lawyer will be in touch." She hit send before she could regret it. The response came in seconds. "You're going to regret this." Susan blocked the number and turned off her phone. She forwarded the entire conversation to Patricia. She lay down in Karen's guest bedroom and, for the first time in a long time, slept deeply, because finally, she was safe. Karen's house was a sanctuary. Silent, calm, safe. Susan slept for the first time in weeks without needing to lock the door, without fear of being woken up by screaming, without the constant tension. Being at Karen's house, Susan started to have more mental clarity. Away from James, away from the constant manipulation, she could think. It was Karen who brought more information about Amber. "My friend who works at the same company as James told me some things," Karen said one morning, having coffee with Susan. "What?" "Apparently, Amber has a history. She's already been involved with at least 2 other married men at the company. There are rumors she was transferred to another department once because of it." Susan didn't know how to feel. On one hand, it confirmed that Amber wasn't the innocent victim. On the other hand, it didn't change the fact that James had chosen to cheat. "And everyone at the office knows about them," Karen continued. "James isn't hiding it very well. He goes out to lunch with her, talks openly. People know about the pregnancy, too." Susan felt humiliation and anger. While she was at home being a dedicated wife, James was building a parallel life that everyone knew about. Everyone except her. Susan grabbed her laptop and searched for Amber on social media. She found her quickly public profiles. And in recent photos, the 5-month belly was clearly visible. Susan took screenshots of everything. More evidence for Patricia. A few days later, James called. Susan hesitated, but answered. "Susan, we need to talk," James said. "About what?" "About everything. About Amber, about the baby, about us." Susan remained silent, waiting. "Look, I know you're upset about the situation," James continued, "but the pregnancy doesn't change anything. The baby is going to be born. That's a fact. The question is how we're going to deal with it." "How we're going to deal with it," Susan repeated, incredulous. "Yes, I can take care of 2 families, Susan. Financially, it's not a problem. Emotionally, I have enough love for both of you. We can make this work if you just give it a chance." Susan felt nauseous. "You really believe this?" "I do," James said. "And I think if you stopped being so closed-minded, you'd also see it can work." It's not going to work, James. Never. James changed his tone, becoming more serious. Look, we need to talk in person, in a mature way, civilized, no lawyers, no friends interfering. Just the two of us, talking like adults, trying to find an adult solution to this. Susan immediately became suspicious. A solution? Let's schedule a dinner, James proposed. At our house, just the two of us. I'll make dinner, you come, we talk honestly. No judgments, just trying to understand each other. Something in his voice made Susan suspicious, but she also knew she needed to face James eventually. She needed to have that final conversation. On when? She asked. Friday night. 2 days from now, James said quickly. Gives you time to think, to prepare. Friday night, Susan agreed. But James, if you try anything. I won't, James interrupted. I promise. I just want to talk. I want us to find a civilized solution to all of this. After she hung up, Susan stared at the phone. Something wasn't right. James had agreed too quickly, had been too persuasive. He was planning something. She immediately told Karen about the dinner. I don't like this, Karen said. He's plotting something. You shouldn't go alone. I'll be fine, Susan said, but she wasn't convinced. What if he does something? What if he gets violent again? Susan thought about the shattered plate, his explosion of rage. Karen was right. She couldn't trust James. So what do I do? Karen thought for a moment. You go. But we're going to protect ourselves. I'll go to your house before you get there. I'll hide my phone somewhere in the dining room, recording. If James does or says anything suspicious, we'll have proof, and Patricia can use it. Record? Susan repeated. Yes, Karen said, getting excited about the idea. Look, I'll hide my phone somewhere strategic, recording everything. If he does anything, any threat, anything that could be considered abuse, we'll have evidence. And Patricia can use it in the divorce. Susan hesitated. Isn't that kind of wrong? Wrong is what he did to you for 15 years, Karen said firmly. Wrong is the betrayal, the lies, the emotional abuse. This is protection. This is smart. Susan knew Karen was right. Okay, let's do it. The next morning, Susan called Patricia and told her about the dinner. I don't like this, Patricia said. But if you're going, we need to prepare. First, document everything. If he makes any threat, anything that could be considered abuse, we want to have proof. Karen is going to hide her phone recording, Susan explained. Good, Patricia approved. And there's something else. Susan, do you know what a restraining order is? Vaguely, Susan admitted. It's a court order that prohibits someone from approaching you, from contacting you, Patricia explained. Given James's history of aggressive behavior, especially the plate incident, you may qualify for one. But he didn't physically assault me, Susan pointed out. Emotional and psychological abuse also count, Patricia said. And the threat of violence, which is what happened when he threw that plate, definitely counts. If something happens at this dinner, if he threatens you in any way, we can use that along with everything else to get the order. Okay, Susan said, processing everything. And if we get the order, what happens? He's legally obligated to stay away from you, Patricia explained. No calls, messages, emails, physical proximity. If he violates it, he can be arrested immediately. The order can be temporary at first, but we can make it permanent. The word arrested echoed in Susan's mind. She never imagined it would come to this. But looking back at everything that had happened, she knew it was necessary. I'll keep my phone on during the dinner, Patricia said. If you need me, if something goes wrong, you call me. I'll be ready. Susan hung up and looked at Karen, who was sitting next to her in the living room. I'm scared, Susan admitted. I know, Karen said, holding her friend's hand. But you're not alone. I'll be a few blocks away. Patricia is on standby. You're prepared. And Susan, you're much stronger than you think. Susan took a deep breath. In 2 days, she would have the final confrontation with James, and something told her nothing would be as she expected. But she was ready. Because for the first time in 15 years, Susan wasn't fighting for James or for the marriage. She was fighting for herself. Now tell me something. Have you ever had to prepare for a difficult confrontation with someone you loved? That moment when you know you need to be strong, but you're dying of fear inside. How did you prepare? Tell us in the comments. Your story might help someone who's going through the same situation right now. Friday came too quickly. Susan woke up at Karen's house with a knot in her stomach. Today would be the day. The final confrontation with James. Are you sure you want to do this? Karen asked for the 10th time while they had coffee. I am, Susan replied, although her heart was racing. I need to do this. I need to look him in the eyes one last time. Around 5 in the afternoon, Karen went to Susan's house. She had a copy of the key. She entered quietly, went to the dining room and hid her phone behind a flower vase on the shelf, positioned perfectly to capture the table. She started the recording and left quickly. It's done, Karen said when she came back. The phone is recording. The battery will last about 4 hours. Susan nodded. She dressed carefully. Nothing too dressy. Jeans and a simple blouse. She wasn't trying to impress James. She was just trying to survive that night. At 7 o'clock sharp, Susan parked in front of the house that had been her home for so many years. The lights were on. She took 3 deep breaths before getting out of the car. She opened the door with her key and entered. The house smelled like food. James had really cooked. The dining room table was set, candles lit, music playing. For a moment, Susan felt a pang of nostalgia. How many nights had they had dinner there? How many conversations? How many laughs? But then she remembered. It had all been a lie. Susan! James appeared from the kitchen, smiling. You came? I was afraid you'd change your mind. I'm here, Susan said, keeping her voice neutral. You said you wanted to talk. Yes, James said, gesturing to the table. Sit. Dinner is almost ready. Susan sat down, her eyes discreetly checking if she could see Karen's phone. She saw the flower vase, but not the phone. Good. That meant James wouldn't see it either. Before James could say anything else, the doorbell rang. Susan froze. Who is it? Ah, James said, a strange smile on his face. It's part of the surprise. He went to the door. Susan felt her heart race. Something was very wrong. James opened the door and 3 people entered. Susan recognized Amber immediately. Blonde hair, pregnant, her belly now impossible to hide. But there were 2 other people. A young man, muscular, looking like a personal trainer, and a middle-aged woman, elegant, with a professional smile. Susan stood up from her chair, her whole body on alert. What's going on? She asked, her voice coming out louder than intended. Susan, calm down, James said, that smile still on his face. Let me introduce you. You already know who Amber is. This is Tyler, and this is Vanessa. Susan looked at the 3 strange people in her dining room. Amber looked uncomfortable. Tyler looked embarrassed. Vanessa maintained that professional smile. James, what did you do? Susan asked, feeling nauseous. I organized a dinner, James said calmly. A dinner for 4. Well, 5, technically. I thought if we all got to know each other, if we talked like adults, you'd see this can work. Susan felt like she'd been thrown into ice water. You're kidding. I'm not, James said, gesturing for everyone to sit. Tyler here is a personal trainer. I thought you 2 could talk, maybe develop a connection. That way you'd have someone too. It would be fair for everyone. Fair, Susan repeated, looking at Tyler. Tyler avoided her eyes. And Vanessa is a coach specialized in open relationships, James continued. She's going to mediate our conversation, help you understand how this works, how we can all be happy together. Susan looked at that surreal scene. James had really done this. He had invited his pregnant mistress, brought a man to seduce her, and hired a coach to convince her to accept everything. The anger she felt was different from anything she had ever experienced. It wasn't hot, explosive anger. It was cold, calculated, lucid. Tyler, Susan said, her voice eerily calm, how much did he pay you to be here? Tyler turned red. He looked at James, then at Susan. $500. Susan nodded. Then she turned to Vanessa. And you, how much did he pay you? I charged $200 per hour of consulting, Vanessa said, her professional mask starting to crack. But I didn't know exactly what the situation was. If I had known. If you had known what? Susan cut her off. That he was trying to psychologically manipulate his wife. Susan then looked at Amber, who was sitting silently, tears streaming down her face. And you? Susan asked, her voice a little softer. Are you comfortable being used as a piece in his sick game? Amber shook her head, sobbing. James took a step forward. Susan, you're not understanding. I'm trying to make this work for all of us. And then he did something that made Susan's stomach turn. He took Amber's hand and placed it on her belly, looking at Susan. This baby is going to be born in 3 months. You could be the godmother. You could be part of this new family I'm building. Tyler here is willing to give you attention. Vanessa is going to help you overcome your blocks. All you need to do is accept that love has no limits. At that moment, something broke inside Susan, but it wasn't sadness. It was a lucid and powerful fury that she had never felt. Susan finally turned to James, and what she said next, she said with a calm that surprised even herself. You just gave me the greatest gift of my life, James. You know why? Because you freed me. From any guilt, from any doubt, from any what if. You showed me exactly who you are, a man so sick, so manipulative that he hired people to deceive me. Who brought his pregnant mistress to my house, who tried to pimp me out. James went pale. Susan, it's not like that. But I have news for you, Susan continued, grabbing her phone. All of this is being recorded. Every word, every action, everything. What? James said, looking around desperately. Patricia, my lawyer, can access this recording, Susan said. I have witnesses here present. I have documented proof of extreme psychological abuse, and I have more than enough to ensure you don't see a penny beyond what the law requires, and to get a restraining order against you. Susan looked at Amber. You're expecting a child from a monster. I'm sorry for you, truly. But this is no longer my battle. Tyler and Vanessa were already moving toward the door, clearly wanting to get out of that situation as quickly as possible. Susan grabbed her phone and called the police. Hello, I need help. I'm being threatened and harassed in my own home. James took a step toward her, threatening, Susan, hang up that phone now. Don't touch me, Susan said coldly. If you touch me, it will be physical assault. And I have 4 witnesses here. The police arrived in less than 10 minutes. Susan had called Patricia while waiting, and Patricia had already prepared the emergency restraining order request based on all the documented history. When the officers entered, Susan explained the situation calmly. She showed the evidence on her phone. She mentioned the recording that was happening. The officers talked to James separately. Then they came back to Susan. Ma'am, based on what you've shown us and the history of aggressive behavior, we're going to grant an emergency temporary restraining order, one of the officers explained. The officer then turned to James, who was pale and visibly in shock. Sir, I'm going to explain this once and very clearly, the officer said, his voice firm. This order means you are legally prohibited from having any kind of contact with your wife. No calls, messages, emails, social media, or physical proximity. Understood? James could barely process what was happening. If you violate this order in any way, you will be immediately arrested, the officer continued. Violating a restraining order can result in up to 1 year in prison. Contact means any kind of contact. Calling, texting, showing up where she is, asking someone else to contact her. Anything. Is that absolutely clear? Yes, James managed to say, his voice weak. You need to get your essential belongings and leave the residence now, the officer instructed. James looked at Susan one last time. She saw fear in his eyes. Good. He should be afraid. 20 minutes later, James was walking out the front door, escorted by the officers, carrying a suitcase. Susan stood in the middle of the dining room, looking at that ridiculous table James had prepared. The candles were still burning, the food was getting cold, and then something unbelievable happened. Susan smiled. For the first time in weeks, she really smiled, because it was over, really over. She was free. Her phone rang. It was Karen. "I'm coming," Karen said before Susan even spoke. "I'm okay," Susan replied. "I'm really okay." Karen arrived minutes later. They hugged tight in the middle of that room. "It's over," Susan said, her voice choked but firm. "Really over, and I'm free." And for the first time in 15 years, she was telling the absolute truth. The days following that night were intense, but Susan remained firm. The temporary restraining order was made official as a permanent order after the court hearing. Patricia presented all the evidence: the messages, the bank statements showing the diverted money, the receipts for the secret apartment, and especially the complete recording of that absurd dinner. The judge listened to everything in silence. When Patricia finished, he looked at James with a clear expression of disapproval. "Sir, the behavior documented here goes beyond marital infidelity," the judge said. "This is systematic psychological manipulation, emotional abuse, and attempted coercion. The permanent restraining order is granted." James went pale. His lawyer tried to argue, but there was no way to defend the indefensible. The evidence was too clear, overwhelming. "If you violate this order in any way," the judge continued, "you will be immediately arrested and can get up to 1 year in prison. Is that clear?" James just nodded, completely defeated. Susan felt an enormous weight lift from her shoulders when she left that courtroom. James couldn't get near her anymore. He couldn't call. He couldn't send messages. He couldn't use other people to contact her. If he tried anything, he would go straight to prison. And James, always so concerned about his image and reputation, wouldn't risk it. He simply disappeared from her life, respecting the order out of pure fear of the consequences. Patricia worked aggressively on the divorce proceedings. And with all the evidence of systematic emotional abuse, the betrayal documented for months, the money diverted to support the mistress, the secret apartment, and especially that attempt at extreme manipulation at dinner, Susan got a very favorable settlement. The complete recording of the dinner became the key piece. James's lawyers recommended that he accept the agreement proposed by Patricia without contesting it. Trying to fight would be devastating for him. The story could become public. His job could be at risk. His reputation would be destroyed. Susan kept the house, got fair financial compensation from all the assets they had built together, and kept her dignity intact. Through mutual acquaintances, Susan learned that James's relationship with Amber collapsed completely shortly after that dinner. Amber finally saw who James really was when he dragged her into that humiliating situation. She ended everything with him the next day, but she decided to have the baby alone, accepting only the mandatory child support. Susan felt a pang of pity for her. Truly, Amber was young, pregnant, and had gotten involved with the wrong man. But Susan also knew that it wasn't, and never was her responsibility to save anyone. Everyone had their own battles to fight. Susan continued firmly in therapy with Diane. The weekly sessions became her safe haven. Diane helped her process all the trauma, deconstruct years of manipulation, rebuild her self-esteem from scratch. "Do you realize how much you've grown?" Diane said in one session. "The Susan from 2 months ago wouldn't have been able to do what you did that night. You faced your biggest fear and came out victorious." Susan knew it was true. She had changed, deeply. She was no longer the woman who accepted crumbs of love, who doubted her own perception, who molded herself to please others. She started doing things she had abandoned during the marriage, things that James always discouraged with subtle but poisonous comments. She went back to painting, bought canvases, paints, brushes, set up a small studio in the guest bedroom that had been her refuge. She discovered she still loved it, that she still had talent, that James had stolen this from her. But she was taking it back. She enrolled in dance classes, something she always wanted to do, but James said was ridiculous for someone her age. In classes, she laughed, sweated, felt her body alive again, met new people who admired her for being there, trying something new. She traveled alone for the first time in her life, took a plane to the West Coast, spent 5 days exploring Seattle, eating at restaurants alone, visiting museums, walking along the waterfront, being completely independent, and it was liberating. Karen was always present, being unconditional support. They became even closer, if possible. Pizza nights and conversations, genuine laughter, support on difficult days. "I'm so proud of you," Karen said one night. "You're the strongest person I know." 3 months after that fateful dinner, Susan was in Patricia's office for the last time. The final divorce papers were on the table. She picked up the pen, took a deep breath, and signed. Patricia smiled. "Congratulations, Susan. You're officially free." Susan looked at that document. 15 years of marriage summarized in a few pages full of legal terms. It should hurt more, but it didn't hurt. It just relieved. When she left that office, Susan felt the warm sun on her face. She stopped on the sidewalk and simply breathed. 1, 2, 3 seconds. It was over, and she was ready to start over. 1 year after that wedding anniversary that changed everything forever, Susan was completely transformed. It wasn't just her appearance, although she was visibly lighter, more radiant. It was something deeper. It was her energy, the way she walked, how she spoke, how she existed in the world. Susan sold the house full of bad memories and trauma. Each room carried memories of 15 years of manipulation, the bedroom where she slept alone crying, the dining room from that absurd dinner, the kitchen where James threw that plate. She didn't want any of that anymore. She bought a cozy apartment just for herself, in a neighborhood she always liked, but James said was too far from his work. A small but perfect apartment, with large windows that let the sun in, with a balcony where she could have coffee on Sunday mornings, with walls she painted in the colors she always wanted. She decorated exactly the way she always dreamed, vibrant colors that James said were too flashy, plants in every corner, paintings she made herself that James said looked amateurish. It was her space, only hers, and it was perfect. Susan was stronger, more confident, lighter, and genuinely happy. Not that forced happiness she faked during the marriage, but a real happiness, deep, lasting. She wasn't in a new romantic relationship, and she was completely at peace with that. Diane had helped her understand that she didn't need a man to feel complete, that she was already whole, already enough, exactly as she was. "Maybe one day I'll meet someone," Susan said to Diane in one of the last therapy sessions. "But if I don't, that's okay too. I'm happy with myself. That's all that matters." And she really believed it. Susan accepted a job, one that came up while still married, but that James strongly discouraged. He said she wasn't capable, that she didn't have a leadership profile, that she would fail and it would be humiliating, that she should stay where she was, in the comfort of what she already knew. But Susan accepted it 3 months after the divorce, and she proved that James was completely wrong about everything. She was an excellent leader. Her team respected her. Her superiors recognized her work. She had found her professional voice that James had suffocated for years. Susan reconnected with old friends she had lost during the isolating marriage, friends that James always found faults with, that he said were a bad influence, that he made a point to criticize until Susan simply stopped seeing them. She called them, apologized for disappearing, and they all understood. They had all seen the signs. They were all waiting for her to wake up, and she made new, healthy friendships too. Through dance classes, Susan met incredible women of all ages. Through the painting group she joined, she met artists who inspired her. Through work, she built genuine connections with colleagues. She had a strong support network now. People who truly loved her, who celebrated her victories, who supported her on difficult days, who didn't expect her to be perfect. Painting became more than a hobby. She sold some canvases online, not because she needed the money, but because it was gratifying to know that other people appreciated her art. Dance became her physical therapy. 3 times a week she was there, moving her body, releasing emotions, feeling alive. And she learned to value and love her own company. Dinners alone were no longer lonely. They were moments of peace. Movies alone were no longer sad. They were self-care. Trips alone were no longer scary. They were adventures. James, strictly respecting the restraining order out of fear of severe legal consequences, never tried to contact her again. Not once. He simply disappeared from her life completely. Susan learned, through mutual acquaintances, that he was alone. That Amber had the baby, a boy, but wanted absolutely nothing to do with James beyond the mandatory child support. That James lost his job 6 months after the divorce due to behavioral problems and harassment complaints from other female employees. That he was having financial difficulties. That his reputation was destroyed. But none of that mattered to Susan anymore. Truly. She didn't feel anger. She didn't feel revenge. She didn't feel pity. She simply felt nothing. James was completely irrelevant in her new life. He didn't deserve even a second of her thoughts. The calendar marked exactly 1 year since that anniversary dinner that destroyed everything. But Susan no longer saw it as destruction. She saw it as liberation. She organized a special dinner, not to mourn the end of the marriage, to celebrate the glorious restart of her life, her rebirth anniversary, as she called it. She invited her dearest people, Karen, her best friend who never abandoned her. Diane, who had become more than a therapist, had become a dear friend and mentor. Patricia, who had fought for her when she was still learning to fight for herself. They met at a beautiful restaurant downtown, a place Susan always wanted to visit, but James said was too expensive or too pretentious. When everyone was seated, Susan raised her wine glass. "I want to make a toast," she said, her voice firm and clear. "Not to the end of my marriage, but to the beginning of my real life." The 3 women smiled, raising their glasses. "A year ago, I was destroyed," Susan continued. "I thought my life was over, but you 3 showed me it was just beginning. Diane taught me to value myself. Patricia taught me to fight for myself. Karen taught me I'm never alone." Tears of gratitude ran down her face, but she was smiling. "I spent 15 years living for someone else, molding my life around the desires of someone who never valued me. But now I live for myself, and for the first time in my life, I am genuinely happy." They toasted, laughed, talked for hours. They celebrated not a sad date, but a powerful victory. When Susan returned to her apartment that night, she stood on the balcony, looking at the city lights. And for the first time in many, many years, Susan looked to the future with genuine hope, excitement, and the absolute certainty that she was complete, whole, and enough exactly as she was. She had finally found the peace she had been searching for, and she discovered that peace had always been within her. Susan's story teaches us something very important. Sometimes, the greatest act of love we can do is to love ourselves enough to leave situations that destroy us. Susan spent 15 years molding herself, diminishing herself, losing herself. And when she finally had the courage to say no, to set boundaries, to fight for herself, she discovered a strength she didn't even know existed. Many people stay trapped in toxic relationships because they're afraid. Afraid of being alone, afraid of starting over, afraid of admitting they invested years in something that didn't work. But the truth is, it's never too late to choose yourself. It's never too late to seek true happiness. It's never too late to be reborn. Susan didn't need James to be complete. She was always complete. She just needed to free herself from the invisible chains that held her down to finally see that. If you're in a relationship where you feel small, where you constantly doubt yourself, where you feel like you're never enough, pay attention. These are signs, and you deserve more. You always deserved more. The peace Susan found didn't come from another relationship. It didn't come from revenge. It didn't come from James suffering consequences. It came from within her, From the moment she decided that her own happiness mattered more than maintaining the appearance of a perfect marriage. And you? Are you living to please someone, or are you living for yourself? Are you in a relationship that strengthens you, or one that diminishes you? Tell us in the comments. Your story might inspire and help someone else who's going through the same situation right now. And if this story touched your heart in any way, leave your like on this video. Subscribe to our channel to receive more exciting and inspiring stories like this one. And turn on notification bell so you don't miss any of our videos. Your presence here is very important to us. Until the next story.